Hi, team. How are you?
Hi Dashwar, I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you again for joining this session again with me again on this Azure Takeoff show. So we were talking about IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS and all those stuff before. So this time I wanted to reverse the rather than me talking about it. Maybe you could cover some stuff, and then maybe we could dive more deeper into IaaS and what is there for IaaS for people to use.
That is great. So actually, when we talked about infrastructure as a service, right? So infrastructure as a service basically is you're trying to take a part of that infrastructure on the cloud. Okay.
Mhm.
If I try to generalize that, let's divide it into something that you take compute resources from the cloud, or you take storage resources from the cloud, or you take
Mhm.
networking resources from the cloud, right? So
Yes.
if you talk about compute, just to give an overview, you try to take virtual machines or compute resources which can give you power to run a machine, right?
Mhm.
Second
Yep.
is storage, where you store your files, whatever type of files you have, you can store that. And networking is where either you connect your resources on the cloud or your resources on the edge, or a hybrid scenario as well, where you can connect it through different networking scenarios
Mhm.
to connect your infrastructure as a service on the cloud, right?
Great.
So yeah, that's kind of an overview of what infrastructure as a service might include.
Okay. So today, which it seems like there's like three things that you talk about: compute, storage, and networking. Which thing do you want to cover today?
So I think the start of everything is data, right? And we need to
Yeah.
be very clear of how do you store your data. So I would
Mhm.
like to start with data, and we think it is very easy, right? We use OneDrive, Dropbox every day. Like, just take a file, store it on OneDrive, store it on Dropbox. But no, if you talk about cloud computing, there is specific storage for specific scenarios. And I think if we talk about that in detail, we could actually clarify what could be the use case and which type of storage you should use to actually go ahead and use that product, and then store your files with, or whatever types of things you're doing with the storage in that case.
Excellent. So, do you mind going deeper into each one of these scenarios that we could possibly use, customers can use for these storages?
Yes, I would love to. So let me go ahead and share my. I've tried to generalize everything on a single sheet, so we could actually refer that. So here you can see I've tried to divide it into two parts. One is what scenario you can do and what type of storage you can use. So as you can see on the screen, there are so many types of storages available, right? And I want to start with the first two itself first, and then I can also uh, I can also check if you have any questions related to that.
Sure.
So the simple ones are the high performance. Like, you're looking for a solution where you want to run a high performance business critical applications, and you're
Mhm.
running it with a virtual machine, right? In that
Okay.
case, the disk storage is the best option, where you will connect to your compute resources a disk, and that disk can be a normal HDD, it can be an SSD, whatever type of disk you want. That disk can be used for a high performance and business critical applications for you. And the
Okay.
second one is the blob storage, which is being used on a very regular basis. It's mostly object storage, you can consider it in a way,
Mhm.
where you can store any kinds of images, unstructured data, whatever type of data you have. You can actually go ahead and store it on a blob storage. So these are mainly the two common types, where
Okay.
either you use a disk with your virtual machine, or the other scenarios which you have, or you can go ahead and use the blob storage in that case.
So I have a question here too, as in okay, so let's say that I have a Kubernetes environment. Which storage should I use? Like, I mean, my microservices, some of my microservices store things onto disk. Should I choose between blob or should I choose between disk?
So in that case, see, if I talk about anything which is compute, and you're
Mhm.
using resources or that storage to compute that. So for as an example, I want to give you is you're running your OS on that storage, right? So you would
Mhm.
use always the Azure disk in that case, okay?
Okay.
But in a way where you're storing, just to give you an example, any analytics data, or you want to store some data from your mobile applications, or you
Okay.
want some long-term data or flexible data in that case, in that place, you will use the Azure Blob Storage.
Okay.
And mainly the Azure Blob Storage is for objects. So you can use for any of your cloud native workloads as well. So in that case, when you're using Kubernetes, your high performance computing or the cloud native applications which you're using can use the Azure Blob Storage in that case.
Okay. So an example would be like if I actually store images, I would use the blob storage because it might
Correct.
transform into a smaller thumbnail or something rather than using the disk.
Agree 100%. And you will have uh, an added layer of security where you can generate tokens, policies of how that data has to be accessed, which resources it can access, and if there is an expiry date also for that resource as well.
Great. So what's the next
And
one?
so the next one is the Azure Data Lake Storage.
Okay.
Now, with the name, what do you think data lake storage would be?
Lots and lots of data on a water kind of a lake.
So,
Yeah.
so conceptually, you are correct, right? So, basically, Azure Data Lake is for big data, or that's why the name is data lakes in that case, where you have a limitless scale available for it. So, the data durability in terms of going into different geos,
Mhm.
working with and plus an added layer of that is you get uh, a higher level of security as well as flexibility to protect your data. So one of the examples is you can run a role based access control on your data lake as well, and
Mhm.
integrate your Azure Active Directory to authenticate the scenarios. So this is somewhere it's for bigger enterprises, higher capacity data, so that you can actually go ahead and include it in your data lake storage.
Okay.
The next one is the Azure Files. So, as the name suggests, it is used mainly for storing file, you know,
Mhm.
uh, which are you can say serverless. Okay, what I
Okay.
mean by serverless in that case is, and it is still enterprise grade, right? So what I mean by serverless is you can take full advantage of this, and you have all the accessibility standards available, which can be mounted on your on your Windows machines, on your
Okay.
Linux machines or Mac OSs, like that. So how you had network drives before, right? So you can
Yeah.
actually create file shares, and which is through the Azure file shares, which can be cached to your Windows servers, or to your Linux machines or Mac OS, wherever the data is being used frequently in that case. And this is
Okay.
built for hybrid environment mainly, where you can have your caches on premise as well, on cloud as well, so that the performance gets increased. And because it is serverless, you can distribute it to a higher environment, where you can include it to any IaaS services or any NAS fillers which you have in your own on-premise environments. You can actually go ahead and use that.
Okay. Great. So do you know what protocol it uses? The file storage is it SMB or what kind of protocol does it use?
Yes, so
Or is
it,
it?
it uses the SMB and the NFS protocols,
Oh, cool. Awesome.
and it's the industry standards, right? So that's where most of the audiences would go ahead and use that.
Sounds good.
And the next one comes is the Azure NetApp files. Now, this is a very new thing, actually, and have you heard about NetApp files before?
Isn't it a lot of enterprises use NetApp for backups and stuff?
Yes, so it's used mainly in the line of the enterprise line of businesses applications, right?
Okay.
Uh, and it's again a file-based thing with no code, no code changes, or you can say no file storage services are available in that case. So these are
Okay.
mainly lift and shift kind of environments when you're using it, and mainly it's used with SAP or any high performance compute based applications, or any enterprise based web applications in that case.
Okay. So I could store a lot of data into it. Basically, is that what you're saying?
Yes, high,
Okay.
like lot of amounts of data in that case.
So rather than having it on my own premises, I could use the cloud version of NetApp and store all the information which I'm used to in my own environment. Is that the
Correct.
case? Cool.
Yes, that's the case.
Now I've got a question basically. So if I could store lots of data, I have like, I don't know, 100 petabytes of data. Now, wouldn't that actually cost me quite a lot to transfer it to the cloud?
Yes, and you're right. So, many of the companies, they don't account the terms or, the bandwidth which is being used in the network. And I think when we cover the networking part, we'll try to include, how the bandwidth also plays a very important role when you're, moving data. So that's not a problem. When you have higher amount of data, there is another type of storage available or a storage
Okay.
service available, which is called as the Azure Data Box. The data box is nothing but three different types of ways you can take your data to the cloud. So you don't need to spend money on networking because there are some cases where you won't have that good amount of data connection. So
Mm,
uh, it might take ages when you want to put petabyte of data to the cloud, right?
yes.
And again, the cost of bandwidth would also matter a lot when you're actually moving the data to the cloud. So there are three types of Azure data boxes available. The first one is the normal data box, which is a rugged device which is of 100 terabyte capacity, and they use the NAS protocols. You can just copy
Okay.
the data. It has a 256 bit encryption, and then
Mm,
it's safer when you transit it from your on-prem to the cloud environment. And
okay.
Azure takes care of it to take that data from the physical data box and then put it on Azure. The second
Okay.
one is a smaller storage, which is smaller in size as well, which is the data box disk. It consists of 8 terabyte of SSD, which has a 128 bit of encryption, and you can
Mm,
customize it into a packs of 5, which can bring it up for you as a 40 terabyte of data in total, and
okay.
larger amounts of data. So as you said, you have like higher petabytes of data available to transfer to Azure. So you can use the data box heavy, which is uh, of a capacity to have 1 petabyte of data to the cloud. So you can book as many data box heavies you can, put your data locally or through on-premise on the data box, and then ship it to Azure in that case.
Okay. So, I mean, I could see a potential of this use case for even disaster recovery to actually, if I have lots of data, let's say I contain lots of videos and stuff, I'm a broadcasting company, it might be good to actually use this kind of solution and then have it in the cloud. And whenever I need to restore it, if my data center doesn't work or whatever, or if I'm planning to use the cloud anyways, there would be a potential way of doing it too.
Agree, 100%. So that's one of the and this is the fastest way. So in
Mm,
some of the regions we have seen the network is not that stable, or maybe
yeah.
you might have power cuts, or you might have issues with the data bandwidth as well. So in that case, moving that much of data, it would be time consuming, and during disaster recovery, as you said, it's the fastest way to take your data and put it on the cloud environment.
So we were talking about NetApp. Does this connect to NetApp too? If I ship the data and then,
Yes.
like, let's say I want to. Okay, great. So I could
So
use
you can
any.
connect that as well.
Yeah,
Yes, 100%.
cool.
And the last two are, where, so one of them is the Azure File Sync. This
Okay.
is this is in case, so when you're using the Azure files, it is available on the cloud. So when I talked about the hybrid scenario as well, when you're using it as a network drive or caching it on premise data, you will use a slightly different service, which is the Azure File Sync. So the Azure File Sync would be, for you to go ahead and cache your on-premises data. And the
Okay.
last one is the Azure Stack Edge, where you're still using your on-premise hardware, and you're bringing the technology of cloud storage or the gateway of the cloud storage to transfer the data easily between cloud and edge devices using the Stack Edge. So the whole thing is actually being deployed on your edge environment in that case.
Okay. So
So
could it? How does it actually? The gateway actually works. It's like if I have an edge device that is out in a factory of some sort, I could actually easily sync that data that is capturing. I don't know, some kind of sensor information. I could easily capture that, have it buffered, and then send to the cloud, kind of thing.
if I talk to you in a different way, so when we are talking about infrastructure as a service, right? So this
Yes.
is something called as hardware as a service,
Okay.
and you can use the IoT edge in that case.
Yeah.
So when you have like environments where you want to still keep a local cache of your data, and then you can utilize an automatic upload in the background, which will go ahead and use this storage as like use this gateway as a storage to take it to the cloud and
Okay.
prepare another copy of that. And this
Okay.
also has different options available, where you can use the hardware as a service in that case, where you can bring the cloud to edge experiences, where you can configure and monitor your Azure stack using the
Mhm.
management portal, which you get it from Azure. So still you have
Okay.
the on-premise environment, but you can still monitor and do everything using the Azure stack environment in that case.
Okay. No, this is great. I learned quite a lot today, actually, Atim. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Tashar. But I think now at the end of the storage lesson, what I feel is when I started learning about this, I was just aware about the blob storage and the disk storage, right? Because this is
True.
the most commonly used. Like you run a OS, you have a disk, you store something, it's a blob storage, right? But
Yeah.
when you actually dig deep down in, different types of data, or where and what scenario can be used, like,
Yes.
I want analytics, go ahead and use data lake storage. I
Yeah.
want to have a network drive, go ahead and use Azure Files. So each and everything can be actually divided, and that will speed up your process of when you're going into the cloud. And I hope this was useful for our audiences as well. If you have any questions, you can go ahead, ping
Comment.
us, yeah, ping us or
Yeah.
comment on this same video, and we'll be there to answer you. And don't forget to join our Azure community as well. We'll post a link over here on the bottom of this video. And I think yeah, that's it from my side, Tashar.
Yeah. Exactly. Join our community. Join the YouTube channel too. So thank you so much, Atim. I learned quite a lot today. So I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thank you. Thanks
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.